I'm Dan Havekost, Daniel J. Havekost. I was born in Fremont, Nebraska in 1936, May 12th. My father was teaching at a religious college named Midland College at the time I was born. My father later went to Yale Divinity School, and his career as a Lutheran minister ensued from there. And we lived in Nebraska and Kansas and Arkansas, and finally came to Colorado in about 1950. Now that was when Denver was still a cow town, quote unquote. And there were streetcars on the street, the old rail cars. In fact, I went to junior high school, the old Grant Junior High School, and rode the streetcar to school every day. Went to high school, South High School, and that was where I first had an inkling that I wanted to study architecture. My mother was a musician, and she wanted strongly for me to take up music in some way and sort of follow in that direction. And so I did take a lot of music lessons. She was a piano teacher. I never took piano from her, but I took from other people. But I never really had the passion that I think is necessary and to pursue a career in music. And but I learned to love music, and we often attended symphonies and operas and things such as that. And I think that musical education, if you will, early on as a child helped me in my career in ecclesiastical design, in auditorium design, and an appreciation of acoustics and melding acoustics into architecture, because I understood how important that acoustics was to theater and sound and music. Growing up in Denver was really interesting. The ski train, and there was what they called the Eskimo Ski Club in junior high and high school. There was a group of people that came around and had assemblies, and anybody who was interested in skiing. Of course, I'd never skied in my life, but they were promoting kids to join this club. And if you could get somebody's dad to take you to the Union Station at 6 a.m. in the morning, you could take the ski train to Winter Park, and for like $7, go up and back, rent the equipment, and ski. It was at Denver Mountain Park. It was a fantastic opportunity. So we did this. A bunch of my buddies, you know. We bought old wooden Army surplus skis and these very dangerous thong bindings and lace-up double inner and outer boots, and went up skiing. I mean, we didn't know. There were no lessons, there were no teachers really. You just went up with your buddies and away you went. But it was a lot of fun, and I loved it. So I went to the South High School and was interested in drawing, and always liked to work with my hands, did carpentry work and various things like that. And one of my drafting teachers in mechanical drawing said he thought I should go into architecture. And in fact, DU had a program in architecture at that time. This was early 50s. And I went over to DU and visited the School of Architecture there, and was sort of interested in pursuing it, and actually had an opportunity to hear Frank Lloyd Wright speak to in one of the auditoriums early on. And I didn't know really who he was, but he was an architect in town that was, I guess, being considered for a design of the Air Force Academy at that time. Of course, Air Force Academy design master plan was done by Skidmore and Merrill, and quite a different approach than Wright had to it. And so he was very critical of what was happening. He came in with a cape and a cane and whatever, very theatrical. But I was sort of taken with all that and thought I'd like to pursue architecture. I was just starting to get an idea of what architecture, a career in architecture really would be. And I absolutely fell in love with design and drawing, graphic presentations, but I also discovered that it was really going to be an arduous, difficult program. Early on, I got involved with the American Institute of Architects student chapter. There was an effort of some of the students to get together and want to be professional or want to find out more about the profession. Since CU was sort of an infant school of architecture, we wanted to reach out to other students in other universities. And early on, I was a delegate to a national convention as a student, and a bunch of us drove down to Phoenix and went to one of the national conventions there, and there was a student component of that, which was just really exciting. Several of us, some years later, went to Washington, D.C. for another student convention, drove across the country, got an exposure to other students that were from other colleges, and that sort of experience brought me into wanting to be a part of AIA, an American Institute of Architects, and that professional organization right from the start. When I became president of the state society, I was president of the Denver chapter first, became president of the state society. I wanted to expand the AIA to the mountain areas. There was a Denver chapter, there was a South chapter in Colorado Springs, and a newly formed North chapter in Boulder. But there was nothing across the Continental Divide. And so I promoted meetings of the board of the State Society of Architects in different mountain towns. And so it was a little difficult for us all to drive there and have a meeting, but we got architects that would come to a board meeting and find out what AIA was about. And I really was intent on getting these architects. We had a meeting in the Steamboat Springs, and they're wonderful guys that were working up there, but they were not a part of AIA, and they didn't have an opportunity to be a part of the profession, really. And so I really pushed that. My wife and I had talked about going somewhere else other than Colorado after I became licensed and to get some experience. And we decided to move to San Francisco. And we did that. We lived right in the city, rented a little Victorian, and I was offered a job with Anshin and Allen, an architectural firm in the Bay Area, had their office right downtown, and offered a job as a designer. Bob Anshin liked my design work. My first assignment was to work on a competition for the governor's mansion in California. Well, that was quite a challenge. And we were not able to win it. There were over 200 entries. But to have that kind of an opportunity was pretty amazing. And then I worked on some other projects as a designer. I was given an opportunity to design quite a large church in Stockton, California, which was built, and it was a really exciting opportunity, and then was one of 5 designers that worked on another competition, a national competition for the Lawrence Hall of Science. Lawrence was the scientist that had really developed, Robert Lawrence, the atomic bomb and that whole atomic theory that was based in Berkeley. And in the mountains, the foothills up above the Cal campus was a site where they were intending to build a interactive museum of advanced science. And it was going to be named after Robert Lawrence. And we had an opportunity to be invited to enter that competition. Skidmore and Merrill, Saarinen, the IMPay firm, DeMars and Ray, and Anshin and Allen. Those 5 firms were the finalists in that competition, and we ended up winning it. Now that was one of the most exciting opportunities for a young architect, if you can imagine. But I had then received a note from Vic Hornbein saying that they had received the commission for the Denver Botanic Gardens Conservatory and what have you, and he was wondering if I had any interest in coming back to Denver, and if I did, there was a place for me. My wife and I discussed it and decided that we'd like to take that opportunity, and it seemed like a really exciting project that they had. And so I came back in about '63, and I was with, and they offered me an associateship, and I was an associate architect with a firm then for about 3 years, and left Hornbein and White. Ed White was a partner with Vic at the time, and left and started my own practice in '65. Tish Papachristou, who I had kept in touch with, had an opportunity to become a partner in the Breuer firm, Marcel Breuer in New York. And Tishan talked to me a couple of times about, you know, could I fill in and monitor some of the projects he had going, because he wanted to try it out in New York City, and yet he wanted to be able to come back. He didn't want to burn his bridges, if you will. And I talked with Vic a little about it and said, you know, would you be all right with me kind of moonlighting and handling some of these things for Tishan? And Vic was not happy with that, and I could understand that. So I decided to start my own practice. I had a contract with High Wolf to design site plans for a subdivision he was doing. I'd get $8 for a site plan, and I could knock out 4 of those an hour. And so at night I'd go home. I had a drafting table in my home study, and I always had dinner with my family, played with the kids, did things with my family, and then I'd go to the study and spend a couple hours knocking out site plans. And that was sort of the way I paid the rent. I was able to get a number of residential projects in Boulder as well as Denver, and a couple of multifamily projects, and then started with church architecture, and eventually was able to build a reasonably large firm. We went after a lot of planning work, and we were able to land a commission with the State Land Use Commission of designing a land plan and a land use plan for 6 counties in the state. The state was, for the first time, going to try to do a full statewide plan. And different architects, different groups were assigned a group of counties to focus on, and we were assigned the 6 ski counties in Colorado. The last 8 or 10 years of my career, I decided to go into consultation in defense of design professionals that were in litigation. And I had had an opportunity to serve as an expert witness a couple of times through my career, and had gotten to know a number of the law firms in Denver and the individuals that were practicing construction law and defended architects. And I decided, after the age of retirement of 65, that I'd really spend a few years in concentrating on that phase. And I found that I could be very beneficial to the profession and beneficial in helping the legal community understand what architecture was about, what engineering was about, and how buildings went together, and how important the design element of those buildings were. So had a really interesting opportunity, in a sense, to give back to the profession, but also learn a lot more. Architecture really has engulfed my life in a great many ways, and my love of travel, my recreational pursuits have all been integrated into the architectural practice and the life I've lived. And I truly love Denver. I love the history of Denver. I worked initially to form Historic Denver with a number of other people. We tried hard to save the Moffett Mansion. That was a historic mansion on Grant Street that was going to be torn down, and we wanted the city to buy the property as a museum. The Molly Brown House was going. That was the first one that we really got going, but we wanted to save the Moffett Mansion also. And that was, there was a bond issue, and it was defeated. But it really pulled people together, and I got my partners together and decided the way we were going to show how we could save some of these old mansions on Capitol Hill was to buy one and turn it into a new use, not just residential, but a new use. Another instrumental project that I was very fortunate to be able to design and build my own home early on. When my kids were young, I bought an unused site on Washington Park, at the southeast corner of Washington Park, that had been a part of an old lawn tennis court, had huge big trees and what have you. And I was able to build a relatively modest home in 1970. Now that was pretty early on. And my kids grew up in an architectural environment, and I was really pleased to have that opportunity. I still live in that home today.